The notification came at 9:02 p.m. Alara Vance was standing at her restoration desk, both hands steady, a 17th-century conservation scalpel balanced between her fingers like a surgeon mid-procedure. The basement studio was quiet except for the low hum of the dehumidifier she ran every night to protect the documents spread across her work table. Old paper was fragile. Old paper was also irreplaceable. She treated it accordingly. Then her phone lit up. She did not reach for it immediately. She set the scalpel down first, the way she always did when something required her full attention, and she picked up the phone and looked at the screen. It was a tick-tock notification. Her father had gone live. She pressed play. Alaric Vance was grinning into the camera the way he always grinned when he felt important, chin slightly lifted, one hand gesturing wide like a game show host. He was walking through the basement door, sweeping the camera slowly across her work table, her shelving units, the carefully labeled folders and climate-controlled storage boxes stacked against the far wall. He called it a pigsty. He said it with laughter in his throat, easy and loose. The kind of laughter a man uses when he is absolutely certain nobody in the room will push back. 30 years old, Alaric told the camera, told the strangers watching from their phones at home, and still playing with crayons in my basement. Somewhere off-screen, her mother laughed. Alara watched the whole thing without moving. She watched her father pan the camera across the scalpel she had just set down, across the document folders that contained more legal weight than anything else in that house, across the corner of the room, where she had spent the last 2 years doing work that most people in her field would never be trusted to do alone. He showed all of it and understood none of it. He kept talking, kept laughing, kept performing for the strangers in the comments who were already typing faster than they could think. The comment count climbed. 50, 200, 1,000. Laughing emojis, crying laughing emojis, neighbors she had grown up beside making jokes she would remember for a long time. A relative on her father's side called her a lost cause in a comment that got 47 likes. Someone she had never met in her life wrote that some people were just built to leech, and her father hearted it. Beatrice Vance appeared briefly on screen, leaning into the frame from the doorway with a smile on her face that Alara recognized well. It was the smile her mother wore when she wanted to seem like the fun one, the relatable one, the mother who told the truth about her disappointing child, because she was simply being honest. The camera count passed 50,000 viewers before Alaric finally ended the live. Alara stood in the silence after it ended and breathed. Then she did the thing that would confuse everyone later. She screenshotted every comment, every tag, every laughing emoji, every caption her father had typed before going live, every hearted reply her mother had left under other people's jokes. She saved all of it, organized by timestamp, into a folder she had already created months ago on her phone. Then she went back to the video and liked it. She liked every comment beneath it, one by one, working her way through the thread with the same steady patience she gave to everything. Her phone buzzed. A text from upstairs. Cressida had written 4 words. They just hit 100K. You good? Alara typed back 1 word. Yes. She put the phone face down on the work table and stood very still for a moment, looking at the documents spread in front of her. She thought about the years she had spent in this room. She thought about the nights she had skipped sleep to cross-reference property records nobody else in the family had ever asked about. She thought about how many times she had sat across a table from professionals twice her age who assumed, based on where she lived, that she was nobody. She thought about how many times she had let them assume. Then she pulled her suitcase out from under the work table. It was not a large suitcase. She had learned a long time ago not to own things that could not be moved quickly. She packed methodically, the way she did everything, folding each item once and placing it flat. She took her documents last, the ones she needed, and placed them in the slim black briefcase she kept beside the dehumidifier. She did not take everything. She did not need everything. What she needed, she had already moved long before tonight. Cressida appeared at the top of the basement stairs with her own bag over one shoulder and said nothing, which was the right thing to say. The two of them walked through the house together. Alaric was in the living room, still on his phone, reading his own comments and laughing quietly at some of them. Beatrice was in the kitchen. Neither parent looked up when their daughters crossed the room. Alara paused at the kitchen doorway for exactly 3 seconds and looked at her mother's profile in the overhead light, committing it to memory the way she committed everything to memory. Then she walked out. She was smiling when she reached the car, a small and private smile that her parents, had they been watching, would have read entirely wrong. They would have seen relief, or defeat, or the fragile dignity of a woman pretending she was not hurting. They would not have seen what it actually was. What none of them understood was that Alara had spent years studying how people reveal themselves when they believe the other person has no power. And the moment someone shows the whole world exactly who they are, there is no taking it back. The briefcase was in the back seat. She did not look at it. She already knew what was inside. The city was loud in a way the coastal town never was. Alara stood at the window of the new office on the 14th floor and listened to it. The traffic below, the distant sound of a construction crew 2 blocks over, the particular kind of noise that meant the world was moving and not waiting for anyone. She had spent 2 years in a basement. The height alone felt like something. Cressida was at the desk behind her, unpacking the second briefcase, laying documents out in the order they had agreed on the night before. The two of them had said very little since leaving. There was not much that needed to be said. Everything that mattered had already been done, most of it quietly, over the course of months before that TikTok ever went live. The office was not flashy. It was clean and precise, the way Alara liked things. A long work table. A bookshelf with reference texts that most people in her field kept behind glass. A filing cabinet with a lock that cost more than the cabinet itself. On the wall behind the desk, framed and mounted at eye level, was her credentials certificate from the Institute of Forensic Provenance. 14 words, and a seal that most people would walk past without knowing what they meant. Those 14 words meant that Alara Vance spent her professional life proving who actually owned things, not in the simple way. Not title searches and public records, though she did that too. She worked in the complicated cases, the ones where families had been separated from land and property through negligence, bad paperwork, or deliberate manipulation. She traced ownership through generations. She found the documents people assumed were lost. She sat across from lawyers who had been practicing twice as long as she had been alive, and she laid her findings on the table with both hands steady, because in her field, shaking hands meant doubt, and doubt was expensive. The basement studio her father had laughed at on camera was not a pigsty. It was a document recovery lab. The folders on the shelves were indexed by property parcel and legal date. The climate-controlled boxes her father had panned past without interest held original deeds, some of them more than 100 years old, that she had spent months tracking down from county archives, estate sales, and private collections. The scalpel he had called a crayon tool was a conservation instrument used to separate fragile pages that had been stored incorrectly for decades. He had filmed all of it and understood none of it. Cressida smoothed the last document flat on the table and looked up. She was 26 and had her sister's same stillness, the kind that people sometimes mistook for shyness, until they were in a room with her long enough to understand it was something else entirely. For the better part of a year, she had been the one in the field. She attended the family dinners and the cousin gatherings and the holiday weekends her sister had stopped going to. She brought documents home folded inside birthday cards. She gathered signatures under the cover of Ordinary Conversation, on papers that looked like nothing interesting to anyone who did not know what they were. She had been Alara's field agent, and she had been extraordinary at it. The document on top of the pile was a copy of the original estate deed for the coastal property their grandparents had built, and their parents had inherited and slowly, carelessly, allowed to deteriorate in ways that went beyond the physical. Their parents had refinanced it twice without reading the terms. They had let the property tax lapse 1 year and then paid it late the next, which created a gap in the continuity of ownership that Alara had documented with the precision of someone who knew exactly what that gap meant. They had publicly posted, on a platform with over 100,000 witnesses, that their 30-year-old daughter was a guest in their home, not a resident, not an heir, not a member of the household in any formal capacity. They had said it themselves. Laughing. On camera, Alara had filed the final paperwork that morning. The legal protection she had quietly built around the property over 2 years, the kind that required an active, recognized heir to maintain, was now formally withdrawn. She had not destroyed anything. She had simply stopped holding it together. What happened next was not something she was doing to her parents. It was something her parents had already done to themselves, piece by piece, over years, and she had simply stopped standing between them and the consequences. She sat down across from Cressida, and they worked through the rest of the afternoon without drama. 3 days after the video, a letter arrived at the coastal house from the bank. It sat on the kitchen counter for 2 days before Alaric opened it. He read it and set it down and said something to Beatrice about paperwork errors and how these things sorted themselves out. Beatrice agreed. They had a live stream that evening about their morning routine, and it got 4,000 views, and Alaric was in a good mood for the rest of the night. 7 days after the video, a second letter arrived. This one was certified. A neighbor saw the mail carrier require a signature and mentioned it later. Alaric opened it at the kitchen table, and his face changed in a way Beatrice noticed, but did not ask about directly. 10 days after the video, a man in a gray suit knocked on the front door at 11 in the morning. He was polite and soft-spoken, and he left behind a document that was neither polite nor soft. Beatrice read it twice, and then called her sister in another state and spoke in a low voice for 40 minutes. 14 days after the video, the foreclosure notice arrived. It was followed the same afternoon by a tax assessment bill with a number on it that made Alaric sit down in the middle of the hallway still holding the envelope. The phone calls to the bank started. Then the calls to a lawyer who had helped them with something minor years ago. Then the calls to relatives who did not have answers. Then, finally, the call to Alara. The phone rang in the city office at 6:47 in the evening. Her father's name appeared on the screen. Alara looked at it for the full duration of the ring. Then she placed it face down on the table. Cressida's phone rang 3 minutes later. She looked at the screen, looked at her sister, and set it down the same way. The office was quiet again. Outside, 14 floors below, the city kept moving. They arrived without calling first. That was the thing about people who had spent years using surprise as a weapon. They believed it still worked even when the power had shifted. Alaric and Beatrice Vance walked into the building on a Thursday morning, 11 days after the foreclosure notice, dressed the way they dressed when they wanted to be taken seriously. Alaric in his navy blazer. Beatrice in the cream blouse she saved for occasions. They told the front desk receptionist they were there to see Alara Vance and that they were her parents, as though the relationship itself was a credential. The receptionist called upstairs. Alara had known this visit was coming. Not the exact day, not the exact hour, but she had known it was coming the way you know a storm is coming when the air changes and the birds go quiet. She had prepared for it the same way she prepared for everything, methodically and without emotion, because emotion in a boardroom was a resource and she had learned not to spend it carelessly. She told the receptionist to send them up. The conference room on the 14th floor had a long oval table and 8 chairs, and a wall-mounted screen that Alara used for client presentations. The window behind the head chair looked out over the city in a way that made the room feel serious, the kind of serious that money and precision built over time. When Alaric and Beatrice stepped through the door, they stopped for just a moment, the way people do when a room does not match the version of a person they have been carrying in their heads. 2 of Alara's colleagues were already seated at the table. They had files open and coffee in front of them, and they looked up briefly when the door opened and then looked back down, because they had been told what this meeting was, and they were there as witnesses, not participants. Alara was standing at the head of the table. She was not dressed to impress anyone. She never was. She wore the same kind of quiet, precise clothing she always wore. Nothing loud, nothing performative, the kind of outfit that said she had not spent a single minute of the morning thinking about what her parents might think when they saw her. She gestured to the 2 chairs at the near end of the table and waited while they sat down. Alaric started talking before he was fully seated. His voice had that particular edge it got when he was scared but refusing to show it, a little too fast, a little too loud, filling the room before anyone else could. He said there had been some kind of mistake. He said the bank was being unreasonable. He said he did not understand what paperwork Alara had supposedly filed, or what any of this had to do with her, but that whatever she had done needed to be undone immediately because they stood to lose everything, and she needed to understand what that meant for the family. Beatrice nodded along. She had her hands folded on the table, and her chin at that slight upward angle she used when she was hopping composure would read as authority. Alara let him finish. Then she picked up the small remote on the table and pressed a button, and the wall-mounted screen behind her came to life. The sound filled the room first. Alaric's own voice, warm and laughing, saying 30 years old and still playing with crayons in my basement. Then the camera sweep across the studio. Then Beatrice laughing off-screen. Then the comment count climbing. Then the caption her father had typed before going live. The one that called the basement a pigsty, and Alara a cautionary tale for anyone raising daughters in the modern age. Alaric's face changed the moment he heard his own voice come out of that speaker. The color shifted first, a slow drain that started at his forehead, and then his jaw did something small and involuntary that he could not fully control. Beatrice's folded hands tightened on the table. Neither of them spoke. Alara let it play for 45 seconds. Then she turned it off. She sat down, folded her own hands, and spoke in the same voice she used with every client, level and clear, and without any performance in it at all. She explained that for 2 years, she had been maintaining a legal preservation structure around the coastal property, the kind that required an active, recognized heir in residence to remain valid. She explained that the paperwork her parents had neglected, the refinancing terms they had not read, the tax continuity gap from 4 years prior, had created a chain of ownership vulnerabilities that she had been quietly holding together from inside that basement. She explained that the moment her parents publicly and voluntarily declared her a guest in their home, on a platform with over 100,000 witnesses, they had severed the legal basis for that protection themselves. She had not filed anything against them. She had simply stopped filing on their behalf. Alaric opened his mouth. Alara raised one hand, not dramatically, just a small and certain gesture that said she was not finished. She told them that the estate deed, the original one her grandparents had recorded in 1961, had been the anchor of everything. That the property had been at risk long before that tick-tock, and that the only reason it had survived as long as it had was because someone in that basement had been paying attention when no one else was. The door behind Beatrice opened. Cressida walked in and took the empty chair beside Alara without a word. She set a folder on the table in front of her and placed both hands flat on top of it and looked at her parents with the same steady stillness she had been practicing for a year. Beatrice made a sound that was not quite a word, something between her daughter's name and a question, and Cressida looked back at her without flinching and said nothing. Alaric looked at his younger daughter for a long moment. Something moved across his face that was harder to name than anger, something older and more complicated, the particular expression of a man realizing that the people he thought he knew best had been quietly becoming someone else the entire time. Alara slid a single document across the table. It was a 2-page summary, clean and plain, no legal language that required a dictionary. It outlined what they owed. It outlined what they had lost access to. It outlined the one option that remained, which was a structured transition of the coastal estate into a formal historical arts foundation, a legal designation that would allow the property to survive intact, preserve their parents' right to be acknowledged in its founding history, and remove it permanently from the cycle of debt and neglect it had been trapped in. It was not a punishment. It was the only door still open. Beatrice looked at the document and then looked at Alara and said, in a voice that had lost its upward angle entirely, that she did not understand how it had come to this. Alara looked at her mother for a moment. Not with coldness, not with the satisfaction of someone who had won something, with the particular kind of exhaustion that comes from loving people who only know how to receive love as performance, and finally, deciding that was no longer her problem to solve. She said, quietly, that it had come to this a long time ago. Alaric and Beatrice left the building 40 minutes later. They did not speak in the elevator. They did not speak in the lobby. The navy blazer and the cream blouse felt different on the way out than they had on the way in. Weeks later, the coastal estate was formally transferred. The foundation paperwork listed 2 founders. The house was cleaned and assessed and opened for the first time to the public as a site of documented regional history. Local historians came. A university sent 2 students to catalog the archive. A small article ran in the regional paper with a photograph of the front porch. Alara was not in the photograph. She was back at a work table by then, in the city office, a different scalpel in her hand, a different set of documents spread in front of her. The dehumidifier hummed in the corner. The city moved 14 floors below. Cressida was at the desk behind her, working through a new file without being asked. The phone was face down on the table. There were no notifications worth looking at. The work was enough. It had always been enough. The only difference now was that she no longer had to do it in a basement while someone upstairs counted her as nothing. She set the scalpel down, straight and clean along the edge of the table, and got back to work.